Welcome to Session 1 of our October 2024 Stewardship Series called The Paradox of Generosity. As you know, it's stewardship time here at First United Methodist Church, and we really like to talk about whole life stewardship, whole life, being faithful to God and God's mission with our giving, our serving, our praying, and our witness. This comes from a deep understanding that everything we have and everything we are really do come from God. We are stewards of God's many gifts. It brings us joy to put those gifts to work for God's kingdom, not just for ourselves. Living a generous life, which flows from God's gift of Jesus, is a key to being a healthy Christian at work in the world. Last year, I encountered a book called The Paradox of Generosity. The authors explore lots of data about our generosity as a society and the effects of that generosity on our society and our own well-being. The subtitle of the book is Giving We Receive and Grasping We Lose. I couldn't help but think of Matthew chapter 16, verses 24 through 26. These are three little verses in which Jesus reframes our entire experience of what it means to be fully human and fully alive in the world. Let's hear those verses together and explore what Jesus is saying to us. This is Matthew 16, verses 24 through 26. Then Jesus told his disciples, "If any want to become my followers, let them deny themselves and take up their cross and follow me. For those who want to save their life will lose it, and those who lose their life for my sake will find it. For what will it profit them if they gain the whole world, but forfeit their life? Or what will they give in return for their life?" The word of God for the people of God, and so we say, thanks be to God. Jesus is describing a paradox, which is something that seems contradictory, but which reveals a deep truth. I'd like for you to pause the video and take a few minutes to talk with your group about how this paradox works in our day-to-day following of Jesus. How is it that we lose our lives for His sake, and how and why does that lead to finding true life? I'll be back with you in just a moment. Here in Matthew 16, Jesus says some really hard things about denying self and taking up cross. As followers of Jesus, we are all made part of this massive work of God who is saving the world, blessing all the families of the earth, and restoring creation to its original intent. When we become followers of Jesus, we find a sense of purpose tied to being part of something much larger than ourselves. I read in this book, The Paradox of Generosity, that there is a very strong correlation between increased generosity and a greater sense of purpose in living. Decreased generosity, or almost no generosity, corresponded to a sense of aimless wandering through life. Like any good paradox, there's always the question of which comes first, the chicken or the egg. Of course, it's a both and kind of a thing. As our sense of purpose in life increases, our willingness to share with others also increases, and our willingness to be generous increases. As our willingness to be generous increases, it seems our sense of purpose also increases. Take just a moment now and talk with your group about how self-denial, cross-bearing, and following Jesus might be a kind of an engine that drives the generosity of our spirits. How does it all work together, self-denial, cross-bearing, and following Jesus? And why might it generate a generous heart? I'll be back with you in just a moment. We're still thinking about cross-bearing, self-denial, and following Jesus. We're weaving together Jesus' promise that in losing our lives for His sake and for the sake of the gospel, we find our truest lives, our truest sense of self. Most of us have heard this passage many times over the course of our Christian lives. We know Jesus isn't lying, but sometimes we struggle with the full implications of what He has to say. The authors of The Paradox of Generosity made a fascinating discovery in their research. Let me read a paragraph to you from page 45. This is an interesting part of the book. In the very first chapter, people may rightly wonder whether being a generous person and acting generously is a costly course of life. That's an interesting question. Is being generous and living generously a costly course of life? They might ask whether spending money, time, attention, energy, and emotions on and for the good of others proves to be a net loss in the overall scheme of things. The answer here from the data is clear and compelling. Greater generosity is clearly positively associated with many of the characteristics that most people consider essential to a good life: happiness, health, purpose, and growth. That is a significant finding with major implications for living. Now, in a previous paragraph, they detail just how unusual it is for social scientists to find this level of association and correlation in any kind of sociological data. All that to say, what they found is striking. In giving, we do receive, and in grasping, we lose. The struggle point for many of us is that our society teaches us to grasp and hold on to everything. Giving stuff, giving life away, flies in the face of that cultural norm. The Christian gospel offers a countercultural norm which invites us to live a different way. It's that old story about the monkey who came up on a jar with a banana in it. He put his hand in that jar to grab the banana, but he couldn't get his hand out without letting go of that banana. He found another jar with a banana and put the other hand in that one. Same thing happened. Now he had both hands stuck in jars holding perfectly good bananas. If he had just let go of one or the other, he might have figured out how to shake that banana out of the jar, but he didn't do that. He just grasped those bananas for fear he would lose them if he let go. What happened to that monkey? Why, he died of starvation while holding on to two perfectly good bananas. If we live our lives grasping hold of everything for ourselves, we lose our lives. But if we live life with an open hand, we discover our truest selves. We discover how to become the people God made us to be in the first place. We may not gain the whole world, as Jesus says, but we do gain life. For me, living this way has to come from a grateful heart. It starts with my own gratitude for what Jesus has done on the cross and in that empty tomb, and it extends far beyond that. I want to invite you to a daily practice this week, something a little different that will, I think, begin to transform us from the inside out. Take 5 minutes each day, probably in the morning would be the best time, and quickly list 10 things for which you are grateful. 5 minutes, 10 things for which you are grateful. These could be people, events, things, whatever. Just list 10 and take a moment to notice what happens in your heart as you reflect on God's goodness in your life. The crucial takeaway from this practice is, how might God be calling you to show that gratitude to others with how you live today? As we finish our time together, talk with your group about how gratitude to God might drive our generosity to the world around us. And be sure to take some time to pray for each other before you go. Next week, we'll think about how the biblically faithful practice of generosity enhances our well-being in many different ways. I look forward to being together again. Thank you.